The courthouse hallways gleamed under fluorescent lights as Thomas Harrison, 72 years old, pushed his cleaning cart toward courtroom 4B. He wore the standard janitor's uniform, navy blue coveralls with Thomas embroidered on the chest, and carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd learned long ago that honest work had its own honor. Thomas had been cleaning the Richmond County Courthouse for 5 years, ever since retiring from his previous career. He liked the work, the solitude, the routine, the satisfaction of making things clean. And he liked being close to his daughter, Judge Sarah Harrison, who presided in courtroom 3A just down the hall. Most people didn't know they were related. Thomas used his late wife's maiden name on his work ID, Thomas Williams, to avoid any appearance of nepotism. Sarah had earned her position through merit, and Thomas wanted to keep it that way. This morning, as Thomas emptied trash cans and wiped down benches in courtroom 4B, a high-profile civil rights case was in its final day. The plaintiff was Marcus Chen, a black business owner suing a major corporation for discrimination. The defense attorney was Richard Blackwell, a man whose reputation preceded him, brilliant, ruthless, and known for his contempt of anyone he deemed beneath him. Thomas worked quietly in the back, invisible as always. Janitors had that superpower. People talked freely around them, as if they weren't even there. "Your Honor," Blackwell's voice dripped with condescension as he addressed a witness, "surely even someone of your limited education can understand the difference between correlation and causation." The witness, a black woman who'd worked at the company for 15 years, flushed with humiliation. Thomas's hands tightened on his mop handle, but he kept working. It wasn't his place to intervene. During a recess, Blackwell stood near Thomas, speaking loudly to his associate. "I don't understand why we're even here. These people always claim discrimination when they're simply not qualified. They want handouts, not to work for success." Thomas continued mopping, his face carefully neutral. 40 years as a federal judge had taught him to control his expressions. "Excuse me," Blackwell snapped at Thomas. "You're in my way." "Sorry, sir." Thomas moved his cart. "This is why I hate these diversity hires," Blackwell muttered to his colleague. "Can't even clean properly without blocking hallways." Thomas said nothing, just pushed his cart toward the exit. But his daughter Sarah, walking past on her way to her own courtroom, had heard everything. Her eyes met her father's for just a moment, a silent communication that spoke volumes. That evening, over dinner at Thomas's apartment, Sarah was furious. "Dad, why didn't you say something? That man insulted you right to your face. He insulted a janitor. He doesn't know who I am." "Exactly. Which makes it worse. He only respects people he thinks are important." Sarah paced the small kitchen. "You spent 40 years on the federal bench fighting discrimination. You don't deserve to be treated like that." "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, Sarah. That's why his behavior is wrong, not because of who I used to be, but because of basic human dignity." Thomas sipped his tea. "Besides, I'm not ashamed of being a janitor. It's honest work. I know that, but people like Blackwell reveal themselves eventually. Trust me, I've seen thousands of them in my courtroom over the years. Arrogance always catches up with you." Thomas didn't know how prophetic those words would be. 3 days later, Thomas was cleaning courtroom 3A, his daughter's courtroom, when he overheard the clerk discussing the docket. Judge Harrison had a full schedule, including a high-profile motion that had just been reassigned from another judge who'd recused himself due to conflict of interest. Thomas didn't think much of it until he saw the case name, Chen versus Morrison Corp., the same discrimination case from courtroom 4B, and the defense attorney of record, Richard Blackwell. Thomas immediately called Sarah. "You can't take that case. There's a conflict." "What conflict?" "Richard Blackwell. He's the defense attorney. He insulted me 3 days ago in court. If you preside over his case, he'll claim bias if he loses." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Dad, he insulted a janitor he didn't know was my father." "That's not a legal conflict of interest. And technically, I'm not obligated to recuse myself unless there's a direct personal relationship or financial interest. But ethically, I'm more troubled by the idea of letting him escape consequences for his behavior by giving him grounds for appeal. Besides, he won't even know we're related unless someone tells him." Sarah paused. "Unless you want me to recuse myself." "I will, if you ask." Thomas thought about it. About all the times he'd seen lawyers like Blackwell abuse their power, demean witnesses, treat court staff like servants, about the message it sent when such behavior went unchallenged. "No," Thomas said finally. "Don't recuse yourself. Preside over the case fairly. If Blackwell loses, it should be on the merits, not because of who your father is. But if he wins, he should know he won before a judge whose father he disrespected. You want to teach him a lesson. I want him to learn that every person in that courthouse matters, that you can't predict who might be related to whom or who might have power you don't see. That basic respect isn't optional." The hearing began 2 days later. Thomas made sure to be in the courtroom, cleaning quietly in the back. Richard Blackwell entered with his usual swagger, not even glancing at the janitor pushing a cart near the rear benches. Judge Sarah Harrison took the bench, her expression professionally neutral. "Counsel, state your appearances for the record." "Richard Blackwell for the defense, Your Honor. Maria Rodriguez for the plaintiff, Your Honor. This court is now considering the defense's motion to dismiss. Mr. Blackwell, you may proceed." What followed was a masterclass in legal arrogance. Blackwell argued his motion with brilliance, yes, but also with barely concealed contempt for the plaintiff's claims. He referred to the discrimination allegations as frivolous, the evidence as manufactured, and implied that his opponent was exploiting racial tensions for financial gain. "Your Honor, we cannot allow every disgruntled employee to weaponize claims of discrimination simply because they're unhappy with legitimate business decisions. This lawsuit is nothing more than—" "Careful, Counselor," Judge Harrison interrupted. "You're veering into argumentative territory." "My apologies, Your Honor, but surely the court can see that these claims lack merit." "The court will determine merit based on evidence, not rhetoric." Sarah's voice was calm but firm. "Continue with your legal argument, not your opinions about the plaintiff's motivations." Blackwell's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being reined in. "Of course, Your Honor." As the hearing progressed, Thomas watched Blackwell treat the plaintiff's attorney with disdain, interrupt her repeatedly, and make dismissive comments about the evidence. At one point, Blackwell dropped his pen and snapped his fingers at Thomas. "You, janitor, pick that up." Thomas met his eyes for a long moment, then bent down and retrieved the pen, handing it to Blackwell without a word. "Thank you," Blackwell said dismissively, not even looking at him. From the bench, Sarah's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened. She waited until the exchange was over, then spoke. "Mr. Blackwell, in my courtroom, we treat all court personnel with respect. That includes custodial staff. The next time you need something, you can pick it up yourself or ask politely. Are we clear?" Blackwell looked surprised, then annoyed. "Of course, Your Honor." "My apologies." But Thomas saw the flash of resentment in Blackwell's eyes. He'd just been publicly corrected by a judge over a janitor. In his worldview, that was absurd. After hearing arguments from both sides, Judge Harrison announced her decision. "The defense's motion to dismiss is denied. This case has sufficient merit to proceed to trial. The court finds that the plaintiff has presented enough evidence of potential discrimination to warrant a full hearing. Trial is set for 3 weeks from today." Blackwell's face flushed red. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is—" "My ruling stands, Counselor. If you disagree, you may file an appeal." As the courtroom cleared, Blackwell packed his briefcase with barely controlled rage. He'd lost the motion, been publicly corrected about his treatment of a janitor, and now faced a trial he'd hoped to avoid. As he left, he walked past Thomas without acknowledgement, muttering to his associate, "These diversity judges always side with discrimination plaintiffs." Probably got her position through affirmative action herself. Thomas didn't react. He just continued wiping down benches, secure in the knowledge that Richard Blackwell had no idea how much trouble he'd just created for himself, because in 3 weeks, that trial would begin. And by then, Blackwell would discover that the janitor he'd dismissed and insulted was the father of the judge presiding over his case, and that the case file, as required by law, contained Judge Harrison's full disclosure statement, including her father's name, retired federal judge Thomas Harrison. The revelation was coming. And when it arrived, Richard Blackwell would learn the hardest lesson of his career. Never assume the person you're disrespecting is powerless, because you never know, who they are, or who they raised. The day before trial, Richard Blackwell's associate, Jennifer Walsh, was reviewing the case file when she noticed something in Judge Harrison's mandatory disclosure statement. "Richard, did you read the judge's background disclosure?" "Why would I?" "Just standard biographical information." Blackwell was focused on his opening statement. "Her father's name is listed here. Thomas Harrison, former federal judge, retired." "So?" "Lots of judges have successful families." Jennifer pulled up a search on her computer. "Thomas Harrison served on the federal bench for 40 years, presided over some of the most significant civil rights cases in the past 3 decades. She kept reading, her face going pale. "Richard, he retired 5 years ago from the federal court in this district." "What's your point?" "My point is, where do federal judges go when they retire to stay busy?" Jennifer turned her laptop around. "I looked him up. There's a recent article about retired judges taking on service work to stay connected to the courts. And look at this photo from Judge Harrison's swearing-in ceremony 5 years ago." The photograph showed Judge Sarah Harrison with her family. Standing beside her, beaming with pride, was an elderly black man. The caption read, "Judge Sarah Harrison with her father, retired federal judge Thomas Harrison." Blackwell stared at the photo, then at the man's face. Then his blood ran cold. "That's the janitor. That's Judge Harrison's father. The man you've been treating like a janitor." Blackwell sat down heavily. "Oh, God." Jennifer kept digging. "It gets worse. According to court personnel records, there's a Thomas Williams who works as a custodian in this courthouse. Williams was his late wife's maiden name. He's been using it to avoid any appearance of nepotism for his daughter." Blackwell's mind raced through every interaction he'd had with the janitor. The dismissive comments, the snapping fingers, the complaint about diversity hires, the pen incident, all witnessed by court staff, some of it caught on courtroom security cameras. "We need to file a motion for recusal," Jennifer said. "Judge Harrison should have disclosed that you had a conflict with her father." "Based on what? That I was rude to a janitor I didn't know was her father?" Blackwell paced. "She has no legal obligation to recuse herself just because I insulted her father. There's no financial interest, no direct personal involvement in the case. At best, we can argue appearance of impropriety, but that's weak. So what do? We apologize, profusely, and pray she's professional enough to judge the case on its merits despite my behavior." But Jennifer was shaking her head. "Richard, she already judged it on its merits. She denied your motion to dismiss because the case has merit. Your problem isn't bias. It's that you're about to try a case before a judge whose father you disrespected. Even if she's completely fair, you'll second-guess every ruling. And if you lose..." "If I lose, I'll always wonder if it was because of how I treated her father." The realization settled over Blackwell like a weight. He'd backed himself into a corner through his own arrogance. He could request recusal, but judges weren't required to grant such motions without legal grounds. He could apologize, but that wouldn't undo the disrespect. He could proceed to trial, but would spend every moment wondering if the judge's rulings were colored by her father's treatment. "Schedule an emergency meeting with Judge Harrison," Blackwell said finally. "I need to address this before trial." The meeting took place in Judge Harrison's chambers the next morning. Thomas wasn't present, appropriately, as this was a legal matter between counsel and judge, but his presence hung over the room nonetheless. "Your Honor," Blackwell began, his voice lacking its usual confidence, "I need to address a situation that's come to my attention. I recently learned that Thomas Williams, the courthouse custodian, is your father, retired federal judge Thomas Harrison." "That's correct," Sarah said calmly. "It's disclosed in my biographical statement as required by judicial conduct rules." "Is there a problem, counselor?" "Your Honor, I made some remarks in your father's presence that were disrespectful. I didn't know who he was at the time, but that's no excuse. I treated him poorly, and I'm concerned this creates an appearance of bias in this case. What kind of remarks? Sarah's voice was neutral, professional. Blackwell swallowed hard. Dismissive comments about court staff, derogatory statements about diversity hiring. I snapped my fingers at him like a servant. I was rude and condescending. He paused. You witnessed some of it during the motion hearing. You corrected me about my treatment of him. I did. Because in my courtroom, we treat all personnel with respect. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Mr. Blackwell, are you filing a motion for recusal? I'm considering it, Your Honor. I'm concerned that my behavior toward your father may affect your judgment. Let me be very clear about something. Sarah's voice took on an edge. I'm a federal judge. I took an oath to uphold the law impartially. My father is a retired federal judge who also took that oath and served with distinction for 40 years. Do you know what he told me when he learned I'd be presiding over your case? Blackwell shook his head. He told me to judge the case fairly on its merits. He said if you win, you should win because the law is on your side. And if you lose, you should lose for the same reason, not because of how you treated him. Sarah paused. My father believes in the integrity of the judicial system more than anyone I know, and so do I. Your Honor, I believe you. But the appearance of impropriety exists because you chose to be disrespectful to a member of court staff. That's your problem, not mine. I have no legal obligation to recuse myself because you were rude to my father. Sarah's tone remained professional, but firm. However, if you file a formal motion for recusal, I'll consider it according to the law. But I'll warn you, if I deny it and you continue to raise this issue, it starts to look like you're trying to manufacture bias where none exists. Blackwell felt trapped. If he pushed recusal and it was denied, he'd look like he was trying to game the system. If he didn't push it and lost the trial, he'd always wonder. I'd like to apologize to your father, Blackwell said finally. Directly. Why? Because you're sorry, or because you think it might help your case? The question hung in the air. Blackwell opened his mouth, then closed it, because the honest answer was both, and Sarah Harrison clearly knew it. My father doesn't work today, Sarah said, but I'll let him know you'd like to speak with him. Whether he accepts that apology is up to him. It won't affect how I judge this case. Thomas Harrison agreed to meet Blackwell, but not at the courthouse. They met at a small coffee shop near Thomas's apartment. Blackwell arrived 10 minutes early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first year of practice. Thomas walked in wearing casual clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt, and looked more like the retired federal judge he was than the janitor Blackwell had dismissed. Judge Harrison, thank you for meeting me. I'm not a judge anymore, Mr. Blackwell. Just Thomas. He sat down. What did you want to say? I want to apologize for the way I treated you, for the comments I made, for my disrespect. Blackwell meant it. He did feel genuinely sorry, but he was also acutely aware that this man's daughter held his professional fate in her hands. I had no idea who you were. And if you had known, I would have treated you very differently. That's the problem, isn't it? Thomas sipped his coffee. You would have respected me if you'd known I was a retired federal judge, but you felt comfortable disrespecting me when you thought I was just a janitor. What does that say about your values? Blackwell had no good answer to that. I spent 40 years on the bench, Thomas continued. I saw thousands of lawyers like you, brilliant, ambitious, successful, and so many of them lost sight of something basic. Every person deserves respect, not because of their title or position, but because they're human. You're right, and I'm sorry. I accept your apology, but you should know I'm not the one you really wronged. It's every janitor, every clerk, every person you've treated as beneath you because you thought they couldn't affect your life. Thomas set down his coffee. My daughter will judge your case fairly. She's a better judge than I ever was, and she takes her oath seriously. Whether you win or lose will depend on the law and the facts, not on how you treated me. I believe that. But I need you to know I've learned something from this, about respect, about assumptions, about, Blackwell struggled for words, about how I've been living my life. Thomas studied him for a long moment. then maybe something good will come from this. But here's my advice, Mr. Blackwell. Don't learn this lesson because you got caught disrespecting a judge's father. Learn it because treating people with dignity is right. Learn it because the janitor you ignore today might be the one who notices something important tomorrow. Learn it because a life lived with contempt for others is a small, sad life. The meeting ended shortly after. Blackwell left feeling both lighter and heavier. Lighter because the apology was made, heavier because he understood how much changing would require. The trial would begin tomorrow, and Richard Blackwell would enter that courtroom knowing that the judge's father, a man he'd treated like invisible help, would be watching from the back, pushing his cleaning cart, a reminder that dignity and respect can't be conditional on knowing someone's pedigree. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Richard Blackwell presented his case with the technical brilliance he was known for, but something had changed. Court staff noticed it first. He said please and thank you to clerks. He held doors for bailiffs. When he dropped papers, he picked them up himself. And every morning, when Thomas Harrison entered to begin his cleaning duties, Blackwell nodded respectfully. Thomas nodded back, nothing more. The relationship between them remained professional, distant, but no longer dismissive. Judge Sarah Harrison presided with the fairness her father had predicted. She ruled against Blackwell when the law required it. She ruled in his favor when he was right. Her decisions were meticulous, well-reasoned, appealable only on the most technical grounds. The jury deliberated for 2 days before reaching a verdict. They found for the plaintiff, Marcus Chen, awarding him $2.3 million in damages. The evidence of discrimination had been overwhelming. Blackwell had fought brilliantly, but facts were facts. After the verdict was read, Blackwell stood silently while his client processed the loss. Then he did something unusual for him. He walked over to the plaintiff's table and extended his hand to Chen. "Congratulations, Mr. Chen. Justice was served today." Chen, surprised, shook his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell." As the courtroom emptied, Blackwell approached the bench where Judge Harrison was gathering her papers. "Your Honor, I want to thank you for your fairness throughout this trial." "I was doing my job, Counselor." "Nothing more, nothing less." "I know, but I also know." Blackwell glanced toward the back where Thomas was emptying trash cans. "I know it couldn't have been easy given my behavior toward your father." "You could have let that color your judgments. You didn't. That's the mark of a great judge." Sarah followed his gaze to her father. "My father taught me that justice isn't about personal feelings. It's about the law. He spent 40 years proving that, and I intend to do the same." "He taught you well." Blackwell picked up his briefcase. "For what it's worth, Your Honor, I learned something in your courtroom these past 3 weeks, something that has nothing to do with civil procedure or evidence rules." "What's that?" "That every person in this building, from the judges to the janitors, keeps the wheels of justice turning, and they all deserve respect." Blackwell paused. "I just wish I'd learned it without being humiliated first." "Sometimes humiliation is the only teacher that works," Sarah said. "My father could have exposed you publicly, could have demanded I recuse myself and made this a media circus. He chose not to because he wanted you to learn the lesson without destroying your career in the process. That's grace, Mr. Blackwell. Try to remember it." 6 months later, Thomas Harrison was cleaning the law library when he overheard young lawyers discussing a recent case. Richard Blackwell's name came up. "Did you hear?" Blackwell's firm started a diversity fellowship program, full scholarships for minority law students, mentorship, guaranteed summer positions. Blackwell, the guy who used to be notorious for his no-excuses approach to everything? Same one. Apparently something changed. His staff says he's like a different person, actually treats people with respect now. Thomas smiled to himself and continued shelving books. That evening, he received an unexpected visitor at his apartment. Richard Blackwell stood in the hallway holding an envelope. "Mr. Harrison? Thomas, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all." "Come in." They sat in Thomas's modest living room, and Blackwell handed him the envelope. Inside was a letter from the local bar association. "I've been asked to speak at their annual ethics dinner," Blackwell explained. "About judicial respect and professional conduct. I wanted to run my speech by you first." "Why?" "Because the speech is about you." About what I learned from disrespecting a janitor who turned out to be a legendary federal judge. About how that experience changed my entire approach to law. Blackwell met Thomas's eyes. I won't use your name without permission. But I want to tell the story, because other lawyers need to hear it. Thomas read the speech. It was honest, unflinching about Blackwell's failures, and thoughtful about the lessons learned. It didn't excuse his behavior or paint him as a hero. It simply acknowledged that arrogance has a cost and humility has a value. You have my permission, Thomas said. But add something. What? Add that the lesson isn't about accidentally disrespecting a powerful person. It's about respecting everyone, regardless of power. Because even if I'd just been a janitor with no prestigious past, I still deserve dignity. Blackwell nodded slowly. You're right. That's the real lesson, isn't it? I was only humiliated because I got caught being rude to someone important, but the rudeness was wrong, regardless of who you were. Exactly. The speech became minor news in legal circles. Blackwell's honest account of his failings and his commitment to change resonated with younger lawyers who'd watched him with a mixture of admiration and unease for years. His firm's diversity fellowship became a model for others. And slowly, Blackwell rebuilt his reputation, not as the brilliant but ruthless attorney, but as someone who'd learned that brilliance without humanity is just sophisticated cruelty. A year after the trial, the courthouse held a retirement party for Thomas. After 5 years of cleaning, he decided it was time to truly retire. The event was attended by judges, clerks, bailiffs, and lawyers, including Richard Blackwell. I never understood why you took this job, Blackwell said to Thomas during the reception. You were a federal judge. You could have done consulting, taught at law schools, written books. Why janitorial work? Thomas smiled. Because I wanted to see the justice system from the bottom up. As a judge, people treated me with respect because they had to. As a janitor, I saw who people really were when they thought I didn't matter. I learned more about the legal profession in 5 years of cleaning than I did in 40 years on the bench. What did you learn? That the system works because of everyone in it, not just the judges and lawyers, but the clerks who file documents, the bailiffs who maintain order, the custodians who keep the building running. That respect should flow in all directions, and that the most dangerous people in a courthouse aren't the defendants. They're the lawyers who think they're superior to everyone around them. Blackwell absorbed this. I was one of those dangerous people. You were. But you changed. That's what matters. Sarah Harrison joined them, putting her arm around her father. I'm going to miss having you here, Dad. Who's going to keep the lawyers humble? You will, Thomas said. That's your job now. Keep presiding with fairness. Keep treating everyone in your courtroom with dignity. Keep showing them that justice isn't about power, it's about principle. 3 years later, Thomas Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep at 75. His funeral was attended by hundreds, judges he'd served with, lawyers who'd appeared before him, and court staff who'd worked alongside him during his retirement as a janitor. Richard Blackwell gave a eulogy that brought the room to tears. He talked about how Thomas had taught him the most important lesson of his career, not through a lecture or a ruling, but through grace. By allowing Blackwell to learn from humiliation without being destroyed by it. By showing that real power isn't in crushing someone who disrespects you, but in giving them a chance to become better. Thomas Harrison was a federal judge for 40 years, Blackwell concluded. But he taught me more in 5 years as a janitor than most people learn in a lifetime. He taught me that every person deserves respect, that dignity isn't earned through titles or positions, it's owed to every human being, that the measure of a professional isn't how they treat powerful people, but how they treat those with no power at all. Sarah Harrison, presiding over her father's memorial service, added her own reflection. My father spent his life in courthouses. First as a young lawyer, then as a judge, finally as a custodian. He saw the justice system from every angle. And his conclusion? That justice only works when every person involved, from the Chief Justice to the janitor, is treated with equal dignity. That's his legacy. That's what he taught me. And that's what I hope we all remember. If this story touched you, remember that respect isn't conditional on knowing someone's background or position. The janitor you dismiss might be a retired judge. The waitress you're rude to might be putting herself through medical school. The parking attendant you ignore might be a veteran who served his country. But even if they're not, even if they're just a janitor or waitress or attendant, they deserve your respect. Because dignity is a human right, not a privilege earned through status. Richard Blackwell learned this lesson the hard way, through humiliation. Thomas Harrison taught it through grace. You have the chance to learn it now, through their story. Don't wait until you accidentally disrespect someone powerful to understand that everyone deserves to be treated with humanity. Start today. Start now. Start with the next person you encounter who society tells you doesn't matter. Treat them like they do, because they do.